Welcome to the Prophecy Club. If you were to ask the typical person on the street, hey, how long is it until Jesus returns? Probably 80% of the people out there, maybe even a lot of the sinners, would say, oh, he could return at any moment. Oh, it's not very long. Okay. If it's not very, I don't agree with them, but if it's not very long until Jesus returns, then we ought to be seeing some of the signs associated with his return, like, let me read Isaiah 24, verse 1. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty. That means the people there are pretty much all dead. And maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. That means that when Jesus is getting really close to return, one of the things we'll see is the earth will turn upside down. Oh, Stan, you got that wrong. Oh, really? Let's go on down to verse 19. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. It shall be removed like a cottage. In other words, it's going to move like a hammock swinging in the wind. He makes a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness. But one of the signs, and this is what we're talking about for the next several broadcasts, is that if Jesus is getting close to returning, then we should be able to see that the earth is getting close to turning upside down. Oh, Stan, we're nowhere close to that. Well, now, wait a minute. Did you realize that the magnetic north is moving? And matter of fact, I would even say that the earth is in the process now of turning upside down. You didn't hear about that. Well, that's what we're about to discuss for the next several programs, is how it is already in the process of turning upside down. Now, the guest speaker that we had in has an awesome DVD. It's part of our gift offer. His name is Lloyd Carpenter. He studied the coming pole shift for over 20 years. His topics include the Earth's wobble, Earth tsunamis, earthquakes, weather pattern changes, tornadoes, hurricanes, mudslides, floods, droughts, volcanoes, plate tectonics, sea floor spreading, hot spots, melting ice, the ring of fire, and a whole lot more. The name is called The Coming Pole Shift, and it's normally valued at $30, but right now you can get 3 DVDs in what we call our catastrophe gift offer. You get End of Times by Augusto Perez, The Coming Pole Shift by Lloyd Carpenter, and Signs in the Sun, Moon, and the Stars by John Moore, all for a gift of just $25. prophecyclub.com or 785-266-1112. Let's go on over and listen to The Coming Pole Shift by Lloyd Carpenter.
Because scientists agree that the Earth has tipped over on its axis in the past geophysically, but mostly they say it happened 600, 720,000 years ago, and that it happens like about that length of time in between time. But they get that information from magnometers that they pull behind boats at the top of the ocean, and it shoots down magnetic pulses, and they are able to read within the rocks when the magnetic field changed within the rocks. But Peter Warlow said that only will tell scientists how often it happens within hundreds of thousands of years. That if there were briefer polar shifts, that evidence wouldn't be on the ocean's floor. And so he believes that probably many times the Earth is tipped over on its axis, much briefer periods, maybe only for 1,000 years or so, and it would not show in ocean fragments or ocean rocks themselves. And later I'm going to show evidences where many other cultures have in their history that the Earth has tipped over on its axis physically, and that almost all of them have in their prophecies that in the end times that the Earth will roll up as a scroll or as a potter's wheel or as a wheel and tip over on its axis, and that the North Pole will become the South Pole. In the book of Revelation, it talks about a terrible earthquake that'll be the worst earthquake that's ever happened since humans were on the earth. And it says that the mountains in themselves will not only be fiery, but they will crumble into the sea. And it says that the sea will fill the deserts, and that in effect there will be no more sea. And here we have, also in the book of Revelation, it speaks of a great mountain burning with fire and how it is cast into the sea. And then we see that a third part of the creatures that are in the sea die. And we see how it says that there fell a great star from heaven. Many people think that this is depictive of a meteor. or an asteroid that fell from heaven and will fall from heaven and somehow help fill up the sea, because we are looking at, in the new earth, in the book of Revelation, a world that will have no more seas. There's not going to be any face on the ocean floor in the end times after the earth tips over on its axis. And there will not be any demon on this. I don't want to live on a planet with a demon on the South Atlantic Ocean floor with 666 in his mouth. And there won't be one, because my Bible tells me that there will be, if you will, a mixture of mud and dirt and soil and water and salt water, and that at a certain point they will mix together, that when the earth tips over on its axis, 2/3 of the earth will die. First, when it happens, 1/3 of the earth will die. And then following that period, another 1/3 of the earth will die from the extreme cold. The Bible says that it will be, the sun will be as black as sackcloth of hair, and that the moon will become as blood. So this depicts a lowering of temperatures, a change of crops. And I think it is also fitting that there probably won't be any more salt water. It'll be fresh water, like a well-marbled steak, a well-marbled earth, with like a whole earth that's like the Garden of Eden, if you will. And then my Bible tells me that Jesus will come down and set up the earth as his footstool and lead here as our king for 1,000 years. And then after that, evidently, Satan will be let out of his cage or pit, if you will, for a little while. And then Jesus Christ will tell him what's what. And after that, we all get to split, and then the earth is going to be destroyed, and we will all live in the new heaven with Jesus Christ and the angels. And a lot of people go, amen. And a lot of people look at that and they just say, oh, this is all myth. You guys are just making this up. But now we're coming to a point where the scientific community is saying, gosh, that stuff in the Bible, it could happen. And not only have we seen change in our solar system that makes the scientific community believe that this could happen, but they believe that it could happen right away. They believe that it could happen in the blink of an eye at any minute. Many people in the scientific community have issued and offered evidence recently that's saying there are events that have happened not over the last 1,000 years, but that have happened over the last couple weeks, over the last couple months, over the last couple years, that indicate that the earth is going through extraordinary changes that we need to look at. How do you turn the earth upside down? Peter Warlow said that basically, as in this picture, the North Pole will become the South Pole, and the South Pole will become the North Pole. But as you notice in the graphic, it also says that the North Magnetic Pole, which is not the same as the North Geophysical Pole. The North Magnetic Pole is not even in exactly the same location as the North Geophysical Pole. That it might just stay where it is, and then slowly follow suit within a matter of weeks or months, and that the electricity will change a little on the earth, and that the earth's magnetic field will change. More modern scientists now are saying that no, if the earth tips over on its axis, the magnetic field will probably follow suit at the same time, especially because some of the major anomalies that are happening right now on our earth concerning our earth's magnetic field. So there's a dispute concerning how the earth will tip over on its axis. Peter Warlow said that a lot of people will wake up the next morning and not even know that the earth had turned over on its axis. That they'll watch the news and they'll go, look, Molly, the earth just turned over on its axis. It's on the news. The North Pole is now the South Pole, but we're in the middle latitude, so I guess we're okay. And that, oh my gosh, it's terrible. A lot of people on the coastal plains died because of all the water washing up on the land, and there is a devastation all over the planet, but we're fortunate we live over here in Kansas or in Nebraska, and we're going to be okay, I guess. And I say that's fine, but that's not necessarily how it will be. As a matter of fact, I call this, my Bible tells me, that it will be an equal opportunity cataclysm. That people living in the Central Plains will also suffer very greatly from the earth tipping over on its axis. So they try to come up with different scenarios. One scenario, as with this image, shows Antarctica, instead of actually coming from the South Pole and then going to the North Pole, ending up on the equator, if you will. A lot of people don't believe that this would happen because it would be so devastating, because most scientists agree that if all of the ice on Antarctica were to melt, that it would increase the elevations of sea level by as much as 600 feet. And you could just see what that would do to the land on this earth. So what we have here is a scenario of the best scenario possible, and that is a lot of people will probably be okay, temperatures would drop, but that everybody would not be necessarily as affected as other people. More modern speculators concerning this say that it could be far worse than that. That if the magnetic fields would shift, it would affect the electricity on the Earth. That magnetic pulses themselves could cause capacitors and transistors to just fry and create plasma television fires, create fires in automobiles and airplanes all over America. That airplanes, in effect, would fall from the sky. There's still a debate going on. I just finished doing 12 cities in 15 days, this being my last lecture on this tour concerning this. But one of the things that's great about going to various cities and talking about this is you get to talk with people in the scientific community. And I had some geophysicists approach me, and some people that are electronic engineers, and people who understood some of these things, for sure better than I do, and they were able to come up with different scenarios. And I would see where arguments would begin. And some scientists would say, well, you know, all the electricity is not going to shut off if the Earth tips over on its axis, and the magnetic poles also shift at the same time. That if you shift the positive and the negative on any electric motor, you know what happens. The motor just starts going in the opposite direction. And then another electrical engineer said, yeah, but you're not taking into consideration the effect that that's going to have on the capacitors and the transistors. And I'm just listening, okay? And then someone else would come by and say, even if you're both right and whatever, you're not taking into consideration the dramatic magnetic pulses that are going to be bashing against these instruments and these televisions and these automobiles and these airplanes, and it will definitely create great fires all over the earth. And so I'm watching. I think it's interesting, but sometimes I have found that people in the scientific community tend to talk a little over my head. And so I just made a promise to myself before I came out on tour this time, and before I started talking about some of these topics, that I was going to keep it as simple as I could and not do that. As a matter of fact, I'm one of those people who put little notes on my computer to tell me, what to remember. And one of the things I have, it says, "He who speaks loudly says nothing." That's just a reminder that don't talk over the speaker if I'm being interviewed on a radio or television show, that give him a chance to get his question out and respond well. And the other thing I promised myself is years ago, I find I did not like people who used big words just to impress me. And so I promised myself that if I would become a public speaker, I would not use big words just to let you know that I know how to speak big words so that you'd be impressed and we still didn't communicate well. So I have written on my printer the phrase, autodidactical polysyllabic phrases never impressed anybody. And I do that because it reminds me, don't use those kinds of things to impress people. But there are scientific indications of a coming polar shift. And there are major indications: increased volcanic activity, increased earthquake activity, a slowing and a speeding up of the Earth's rotation, and most recently that's a speeding up of the Earth's rotation, and then abnormal weather patterns. And boy, have I seen some abnormal weather patterns. When I was in Portland, they said, "Lloyd, it hasn't stopped raining here in 44 days. And then I went down to Texas and they said, "We want to show you a picture of one of our bigger lakes." And it was like the San Mateo Bridge in between the East Bay and the West Bay in Northern California. And they had all those big things that hold the bridge up down into the bottom of the lake. And I said, "I see the lake, but where's the water?" And they said, "That's right. That this is one of the worst droughts that we have had since the Dust Bowl." And people in Texas are starting to become kind of afraid. And then we went down to Arizona and spoke to the people in Phoenix. And they said, "Lloyd, it hasn't rained here in 105 days. This is the worst drought that we've had in decades and decades, and we're not certain what's going to happen." And I then went up and spoke to the people in Lansing, in Michigan, and I said, gee, this is kind of weird. I spoke here in Lansing a couple of years ago for the Prophecy Club about the face on the Pacific Ocean floor, and there was snow all over the ground. But there's no snow at all here. And they went, that's right. We don't know what's going on. And I see these types of anomalies and weather patterns happening all over the country as I've taken this last tour. And so we have things that we can look at. And one of the things that we can look at is the simple fact that the axis of our Earth is out of balance. When you look at the Earth as a globe, you'll always notice that it's a little bit tilted. And you'll always notice that at the top is where all the land is, and pretty much at the bottom is where most of the water is. And that tells a person who doesn't even understand science that our Earth is top-heavy, and it's already tilted by 23.5 degrees. I call it the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want tilt of the earth. Because what's happening is also in my Bible, and I want that to be a reminder for me. Today, as I present this to you, I want to warn you in advance that the number 3 is going to come in very important. Because remember when I told you about the king in the Middle East with 30 degrees longitude and 30 degrees latitude at his hands, and at his chest, at his heart is 33 degrees longitude and 33 degrees latitude. And I said that it created a 33-degree arc to get there. Those numbers have everything to do with the advanced mathematics lesson I'm going to give you in a few minutes and the advanced physics lesson. But if you have any 6-year-olds or 7-year-olds that you want to bring in, I promise you they'll understand those 2 lessons just as well as all of us here will, because that's how simple these things can be presented. But the number 3 is central to everything that we're talking about tonight. And I do believe that king in the Middle East is representative of Jesus Christ, not only because of the 30 degrees longitude and latitude here, and the 33 degrees latitude and longitude at his heart, and the 33-degree arc that it took to get there, but there is no other person in my Bible other than Jesus Christ that has so many 3s related to him. Jesus Christ was 3 years old when his parents fled to Egypt in the first place, right in the shadow of those 3 pyramids and where the Church of St. Mark is now. He was 30 years old when he started his ministry. His ministry was only for 3 years. He gave up the ghost, it says in the Bible, at the middle of the 9th hour, which is 3:30 in the afternoon. He finished his ministry at 33 years old. He was sold. Jesus Christ was sold, if you will, for 30 pieces of silver. And he was raised from the dead on the 3rd day. He said to Peter, right before his crucifixion 3 times, do you love me? He had 3 women that he dearly loved, all named Mary. And he told Peter that concerning the betrayal, notice the cock crowing 3 times, okay? There are so many other 3s that I haven't even brought up regarding Jesus Christ and his ministry, and they are there, easy to see in the New Testament. But I also, since what we're talking about here tonight has to do with geophysiology, has to do with the Earth's geography itself, and as it relates to the planets, I think it is very interesting that our sun, that orb in the sky, if you will, is exactly 330 times larger than the Earth. So don't tell me that our God is not a deliberate God. Don't tell me that my Bible is not a deliberate book, because I think that together this whole idea of a marriage of science and religion is finally coming to fruition. I have done about 20 major radio and television shows within the last few weeks before I came out on this tour. And one of them was a national television show when the announcer was asking me about some of the Earth anomalies that would give credence to the idea of the Earth tipping over on its axis. I said, well, there's something called Chandler's wobble. There was a guy, he wasn't a scientist, his name was Chandler, and in the late 1800s he went to the scientific community and he said, hey, all that information you guys have been compiling, I've been studying it, and the Earth wobbles. And they said, you're crazy, the Earth don't wobble. And he says, no, I'll prove it to you. And they said, just don't bother us. And he says, no, look, if you look at that, and then that over there, and don't forget that, and then put those 2 together, and then put this over here like that, you'll see. And they went, no, wow, he's right. And then they wrote up scientific papers, and in his honor, they called it Chandler's wobble. Well, Chandler's wobble stopped wobbling in December, pretty much. And now it's completely not wobbling. And so I mentioned that on the show, and evidently it caused national news. And so people are arguing about that throughout the scientific community, and my name is in the middle of it. And I'm nicer than they are because they're cussing at each other and they're calling each other names, and they're saying, no way in the world could Chandler's wobble stop wobbling because the Earth would be under too much of a cataclysm if that happened. And then they look at the diagrams that I presented concerning it and about what Seth Carlo Chandler discovered. And you know, it only wobbles once in a whole year about, okay? So we're not talking about a bunch of wobbling going on, but when it stops, they can tell it stopped. When it starts, they can tell it starts. And for some reason, it has stopped since December of 2005. And here on this national show, a scientist wrote in and he said, Lloyd Carpenter said that Chandler's wobble stopped. And then you will see in some of the smaller text that this is, however, completely unfounded speculation, as the actual recorded data shows no indication. Because, you know, scientists, they always know what they're talking about, and they always speak in absolutes, and they're right, and there's no getting around it. But fortunately, since they argue with each other, what is fun to watch is that another one writes in, and he says, no, the whole thing is correct, that the Chandler wobble definitely has stopped, and this event, which has developed in the past couple months, could have dire consequences for the history of mankind. And as we then, fortunately, other scientists wrote in and they started showing graphs and charts. And here we see from the U.S. Naval Observatory Earth Orientation Department a graph showing proof that the Chandler's wobble has, in fact, actually stopped. Here's another graph showing Chandler's wobble over a period of time from 2003 to going through to which will finish in July of 2006. And that little green line inside basically just means that there's no movement taking place. So the proof is that something that's always been happening stopped happening. So what we have is a situation where our Earth is off of its axis, it's tilting, it's top-heavy, and it's stopped wobbling. And then, you remember that tsunami in December of the 2005? That wasn't a tsunami. That was an earthquake. And it was a 9.1 earthquake, and what it did is it created the tsunami, and it also caused the rotation of the Earth to accelerate. And that acceleration freaked out scientists because they had to stop what they were doing and reset their atomic clocks. Now, scientists periodically reset atomic clocks anyway. They do it as a matter of natural course. They call it a leap second, if you will. And so they can anticipate when they're going to have to do it, and they look forward to it because then they can measure the information, and then they can see if they see any anomalies that weren't there during the last time that they had to do that. But after the tsunami, completely out of sequence, when they didn't expect it at all, the Earth's rotation speeded up. It actually shortened the days. My Bible tells me about the days shortening. And a lot of people tell me, oh, well, that just means that so many awful things are happening that if God didn't stop it all from happening, the whole earth would be destroyed. So that's what that means. But I am a Baptist. And Baptists, you know, they always want to get everything very specific. And they're very what they call exegesis, eisegesis oriented. And I've had pastors pull me aside after a sermon and say, Lloyd, what you just did was eisegesis, because exegesis is proper interpretation of Scripture. You read the Scripture, what it obviously says is probably what it obviously means. But if I want to go on a flutter and make up some stuff about what I think it means, and I get a little peripheral, that's eisegesis. Be careful, because that's how cults are started. That's how alternate belief systems that don't have anything to do with anything are started. And the idea that my Bible talks about the days being shortened, that's talking about time. And they're talking about shortening it, and no one even knew how that could happen, but for the first time in the history of all mankind, out of sequence, within the last 16 months, the days were actually and truly shortened. Days shortening, off of its axis by 23 degrees, top-heavy. Now we got a new problem. When I went to grammar school, I was taught that the great circle around the poles was a little bit longer than the one around the equator. My teacher, to make it simple to we children, said, the earth is a little bit like an egg, rather than being perfectly round. Archimedes said that if you were to put a beetle on a perfectly round sphere and throw it out into space, that it would spin out of control. and never stop. So the bumps on the Earth and the fact that it's not perfectly round kind of help it with its rotation in the way that it happens now. But there has been a major change since 1997, 1998 period, because prior to that time, it was always being a little bit more egg-like. But then it started changing shape just within the last 8 years. And now, for the first time in history, what they're finding out, and they call it dynamic oblateness, J2 if you will, and that the Earth is actually getting wider around the poles than it is around the, wider around the equator than it is around the poles. And these are graphics that kind of show how that works. And what has happened is that it's happened so much that for the first time in history, recorded history, we have a situation where around the equator is actually 27 miles longer than around the poles. So here we go. We've got things that are happening in our recent history, the days being shortened, the Earth is tilting, it's top heavy. For the first time in history, it is wider at the poles, and it has grown. It is bulging at the poles, if you will, more than at the equator, more than at the poles. And so when you look at our Earth on what's called the ecliptic plane, most of the planets, if you will, are pole to pole, pole to pole. Now there's some slight variations, okay? Mercury, which is closest to the sun, is actually about 7 degrees off of its axis. But most of the planets are pretty darn even, at least the solid planets, not the gaseous ones. And then you have Pluto, which is just way out there. It's like, who knows if that's even a planet. Lately they've been talking about, is Pluto even a planet? Because now this new body, this new heavenly body they've discovered called M13, some scientists are saying that it may even be larger in size than Pluto. And so what you have is a situation where the scientific community is realizing that they are either going to have to say Pluto isn't a planet.
Well, I'm going to interrupt the program right there, but you can get the catastrophe gift offer by going to prophecyclub.com. I'll tell you more about it in a moment. Now from the Prophecy Club, some exciting opportunities for you. Today, we're making 3 DVDs available for a gift of just $25. The first one by Augusto Perez, End of Times. Topics are the Great Shaking, the Coming Famine, the Glory Cloud, the Coming Attack on the United States, the Great Darkness, the Super Devaluation of the Dollar, the Double Portion Outpouring, and how God will protect His own. Then, the Coming Pole Shift by Lloyd Carpenter. The Bible says that earthquakes will increase and the earth will turn upside down. Lloyd has studied the coming pole shift for over 20 years, and he says it is coming. And the topics are the earth's wobble, earthquakes, tsunamis, weather pattern changes, tornadoes, hurricanes, mudslides, floods and droughts, volcanoes, plate tectonics, seafloor spreading, hot spots, melting ice in the ring of fire, subduction zones, the scientific rationale for a pole shift, the Pacific Ocean and plate tectonics. Have earthquakes dramatically increased in the last 10 years? How does the Earth's rotation affect earthquakes? And John Moore, in Signs in the Sun, Moon, and the Stars, gives you a fascinating presentation using biblical, archaeological, scientific, and privileged government information to show you what is beginning to cause these signs in the sun, moon, and the stars. John proves the signs have already begun and will grow in intensity. He was an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and now a homicide detective and radio host. He has been investigating Earth changes since 2000 and has some startling discoveries. John has proof there is a mystery planet heading toward our solar system, which is causing ice caps to melt, stopping the Gulf Stream, causing tornadoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, extremely hot and cold weather. He says the governments of the world know about it and they're preparing underground survival facilities. Included in this presentation is a classified map showing safe locations. It's the Catastrophes in Bible Prophecy Gift Offer. End of Times, Augusto Perez. Coming Pole Shift, Lloyd Carpenter. Signs in the Sun, Moon, and Stars, John Moore. Valued at $90, all available for a gift of just $25. Call 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com. That's Catastrophes in Bible Prophecy Gift Offer. End of Times, Coming Pole Shift, Signs in the Sun, Moon, and Stars. All for a gift of $25.